Welcome to Tenochtitlan, the magnificent capital of the Aztec Empire, in the year 1515 CE, when the city of perhaps 200,000 people sits on an island in Lake Texcoco, connected to the mainland by carefully engineered causeways, dominated by the massive Templo Mayor pyramid, where the gods Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc received daily offerings of human blood, and when a young warrior named Chimali rises before dawn to begin another day of the brutal training that may one day earn him admission to the most prestigious military order in the empire, the Jaguar Warriors, the Quachike, or Shorn Ones, elite fighters who have captured enemies in battle and who have earned the right to wear the jaguar skin suits that mark them as the empire's most feared combatants. For the next few hours, we will explore how Aztec warriors actually trained for ritual combat, examining the physical conditioning that created warriors capable of fighting for hours, the weapons training that developed deadly skill with obsidian-edged clubs, the religious indoctrination that made death in battle the highest honor, and the brutal reality of a society where military prowess determined social status, and where the primary purpose of warfare was not conquest, but the capture of prisoners for sacrifice to hungry gods. If you enjoy these detailed explorations of warrior cultures and the harsh realities behind ancient military systems, please like and subscribe to support our channel. Our story begins in the Kalmekak, the elite school, where noble-born boys and exceptional commoners receive education in warfare, religion, history, and the arts, where Chimali, now 17 years old, has studied for the past 9 years since being selected at age 8 for military training. Chimali is from a commoner family, a Masewaltin, rather than a noble, but he has been identified as exceptionally capable and has been given the opportunity to train for warrior status, a path that could elevate him and his family from common status to the honored class of warriors if he succeeds. The day begins at 4 a.m., 2 hours before sunrise, when the student warriors are awakened by the sound of a conch shell trumpet, blown by one of the teaching priests. There is no gradual awakening, no comfort. The students must rise immediately, must suppress any groaning or complaints, must demonstrate the discipline that warriors require. Chimali rises from his sleeping mat, a simple woven reed mat, on the stone floor of the dormitory he shares with 30 other students, and performs his first ritual of the day, bloodletting. This practice, central to Aztec religious life, involves piercing his earlobes, tongue, or thighs with a maguey thorn or obsidian blade, and allowing the blood to drip onto paper that will later be burned as an offering to the gods. This morning, Chimali pierces his earlobe, the sharp obsidian blade creating a small cut, blood welling and dripping onto a piece of amate bark paper. The pain is sharp but brief, and Chimali has done this hundreds of times over his years of training, has learned to control his reaction, to accept the pain as a necessary offering to Huitzilopochtli, the war god who demands blood to sustain the sun's daily journey across the sky. The bloodletting serves multiple purposes beyond religious devotion. It conditions students to pain, teaches them to inflict wounds on themselves without hesitation, and demonstrates their willingness to sacrifice to the gods and for the empire. A warrior who cannot endure self-inflicted pain will not endure the pain of combat wounds. After the bloodletting, Chimali and the other students proceed to the ritual bathing area, a pool of cold water where they immerse themselves fully, washing away the night's sleep and preparing for the day. The water is frigid in the pre-dawn darkness, shocking the body fully awake, another form of conditioning that builds resilience to discomfort. The students emerge from the cold water and put on their training clothes, simple loincloths and capes made from rough maguey fiber, uncomfortable and coarse against the skin, deliberately chosen to be less comfortable than the cotton garments that nobles and successful warriors wear. Comfort must be earned, not assumed. As the sky begins to lighten in the east, the students assemble in the courtyard of the Kalmekak for the first formal instruction of the day, a lecture by one of the teaching priests on military history, strategy, and the religious significance of warfare. The priest, an elderly man named Tlazotlaloni, who was himself a distinguished eagle warrior before age and injuries ended his combat career, addresses the assembled students with the stern authority of one who has earned the right to demand respect. "Young warriors," he begins, his voice carrying across the courtyard, "you train not for personal glory, not for wealth, not for the empty satisfactions that occupy lesser men. You train to serve the gods, to feed the divine hunger that sustains the cosmos, to capture the precious water, the Chalchihuatl, the heart-blood that the gods require. Our patron Huitzilopochtli is the sun, the warrior who battles each night against the forces of darkness, who rises victorious each dawn, but who must be fed with the blood of captives if he is to continue his struggle. Without warriors to capture prisoners, without priests to offer their hearts on the sacrificial stone, the sun would fail, the cosmos would collapse into eternal darkness, all creation would end. This cosmological framework underlies all Aztec warfare. The Spanish conquistadors, who will arrive in 6 years, will be shocked and horrified by Aztec human sacrifice, interpreting it as demonic barbarism. But from the Aztec perspective, sacrifice is the most sacred duty, the mechanism by which humans maintain cosmic order, an obligation that makes warfare not just honorable, but cosmically necessary. Tlazotlaloni continues. A warrior who dies in battle, who is struck down by enemies while fighting courageously, ascends immediately to the highest heaven, accompanying Huitzilopochtli in his daily journey. There is no higher honor, no better death. You train so that you may earn this honor, so that you may die well if the gods will it. But more importantly, you train to capture enemies alive. A dead enemy feeds no one, his blood spills uselessly on the ground. A captured enemy can be brought to Tenochtitlan, can be offered to the gods properly, can feed Huitzilopochtli and the other deities who sustain us. The greatest warriors are not those who kill the most enemies, but those who capture the most prisoners. This emphasis on capture, rather than killing, fundamentally shapes Aztec combat tactics and weapons. European warfare emphasizes killing enemies efficiently. Aztec warfare emphasizes subduing enemies without killing them, a much more difficult objective that requires different techniques and different weapons. After the lecture, the students proceed to the first physical training of the day, running. Physical conditioning is foundational to Aztec warrior training, and running is the primary method for building cardiovascular endurance. The students run in formation through the streets of Tenochtitlan, following routes that take them along the causeways, through the market districts, past the great temples and palaces, covering perhaps 5 to 8 miles at a steady pace. The running builds endurance, familiarizes students with the city's layout, and displays them to the public. The citizens of Tenochtitlan see the student warriors running and are reminded of the military strength that protects the empire. Chamali maintains position in the formation, controlling his breathing, settling into the rhythm of the run. He has been running like this for 9 years, has built considerable endurance, can maintain this pace for hours if necessary. Around him, other students display varying levels of fitness. Some run easily, some struggle, some fall behind and face punishment from the trailing instructors who hit stragglers with sticks to encourage greater effort. The running continues for approximately 90 minutes, the sun rising higher, the temperature beginning to climb. By the time the formation returns to the Kalmekak, the students are sweating heavily, breathing hard. Fatigued, but not exhausted, the conditioning has prepared them for this level of exertion. After a brief rest and water break, the students drink from ceramic vessels filled with water, or occasionally pulque, the fermented maguey drink that provides calories and slight alcoholic content. The morning weapons training begins. The weapons training takes place in a large courtyard equipped with training posts, practice weapons, and space for mock combat. The primary weapon that Chamali and the other students train with is the macuahuitl, the distinctive Aztec sword club, a weapon that will shock the Spanish conquistadors with its devastating effectiveness. The macuahuitl is approximately 3 to 4 feet long, made from a shaped wooden core, typically oak or other hardwood, with obsidian blades embedded along both edges. The obsidian blades are razor sharp. Obsidian can be worked to an edge measured in molecules, sharper than modern surgical steel, and the weapon combines the weight and impact of a club with the cutting power of a sword. Chamali's practice macuahuitl is a training version, wooden core with obsidian edge fragments rather than full blades, still dangerous but less likely to cause fatal injuries during training. He has trained with this weapon for years, has developed considerable skill, but today's session will push his capabilities further as he prepares for the combat tests that will determine whether he advances to Jaguar Warrior candidacy. The weapons master, a scarred veteran named Yahuatl, who lost his left eye in combat but who still moves with deadly grace, demonstrates the morning's techniques, specific strikes, blocks, and combinations that students must master. The macuahuitl is not a European sword, Yahuatl explains, demonstrating a horizontal strike. You do not thrust with it. Obsidian blades would shatter. You do not hack with it like an axe. The leverage is wrong. You strike with sliding cuts that use the obsidian's sharpness, drawing the blade across the target, letting the sharp edge do the work. He demonstrates on a training post wrapped with thick agave fiber. The strike appears almost casual, but when the macuahuitl connects, the blade slices deeply into the fiber, cutting through layers with a sound like tearing cloth. If this were human flesh, the wound would be devastating. Obsidian edges can cut through muscle and even bone when struck properly. Chimali and the other students practice the demonstrated techniques, striking training posts hundreds of times, building muscle memory, developing the power and precision required for effective combat. The training is repetitive and exhausting. The macuahuitl weighs perhaps 4 pounds, and swinging it repeatedly for hours builds tremendous arm, shoulder, and core strength. Between striking drills, Yahuatl circulates among the students, observing their techniques, offering corrections, occasionally striking a student with a light stick to indicate improper form, the blow serving as both correction and as reminder that combat errors resulting being hit. Chimali, you're dropping your guard after the strike, Yahuatl observes, demonstrating by tapping Chimali's exposed ribs with his stick. In combat, that moment of vulnerability gets you killed or captured. Strike, recover guard, stay protected. Chimali adjusts his technique, ensuring that his shield, carried in his left hand while the macuahuitl is wielded in his right, returns to protective position immediately after each strike. This coordination of weapon and shield is essential for survival in combat, where enemies are attempting to capture or kill you, while you attempt to capture them. The morning weapons training continues for approximately 3 hours. The students rotating through various weapons. In addition to the macuahuitl, they train with the atlatl, spear thrower, with thrusting spears, with slings with bows, developing proficiency with the full range of Aztec weapons. By late morning, approximately 10 a.m., the formal training pauses for the first meal of the day. The meal is simple but substantial. Maize gruel, flavored with chili and tomatoes, beans, some fish or game meat, tortillas. The students eat quickly, fueling their bodies for the afternoon training sessions, knowing that the day's most challenging work is still ahead. As Chimali eats, he reflects on how far he has come and how far he still must go. 9 years of training have transformed him from a common boy into a conditioned warrior capable of fighting effectively. But he has not yet earned his way into the Jaguar Warrior Order. That requires capturing enemies in actual combat, proving himself not in training, but in real battle, where death and failure are genuine possibilities. The afternoon will bring more training, more conditioning, more preparation for the moment when he will face enemies in ritual combat, and will either triumph, earning glory and status, or will fail, possibly dying or being captured himself to feed the insatiable hunger of foreign gods. The afternoon training session focuses on advanced weapons techniques, specifically the combined use of the macuahuitl and the atlatl, the combination of close and ranged weapons that characterizes Aztec combat. Let us follow Chimali through this advanced training, observing the specific techniques and the tactical principles that underlie Aztec martial arts. The atlatl is a spear-throwing device, a wooden shaft approximately 2 feet long with a cup or hook at one end that engages with the butt of a throwing spear. By effectively extending the thrower's arm length, the atlatl multiplies throwing velocity, allowing spears to be thrown with much greater range and power than hand throwing alone could achieve. Chimali's atlatl is made from carved oak, approximately 24 inches long, weighted and balanced specifically for his build and throwing style. The throwing spears, called tlacoctli, are approximately 5 feet long with obsidian or fire-hardened wood points, with feather fletching providing stability in flight. The instructor for atlatl training is a former eagle warrior named Cuauhtemoc, not the famous prince of the same name who will lead Tenochtitlan's defense against Cortez, but a common warrior who shares the popular name meaning descending eagle. Cuauhtemoc has exceptional skill with the atlatl, can hit targets at ranges exceeding 100 yards, and is known for never wasting throws during combat. The atlatl separates Aztec warriors from barbarians, Cuauhtemoc explains to the assembled students. The Chichimecs to the north throw spears by hand like children. We use leverage, we use technique, we multiply our strength through knowledge. He demonstrates the throwing motion, a smooth, coordinated movement involving the legs, hips, torso, shoulders, and arms, all working together to generate maximum velocity at the moment of release. The spear flies from the atlatl, covering perhaps 70 yards in a flat arc, striking a man-sized target made of bundled agave with enough force to penetrate several inches. The effective combat range is 40 to 60 yards, Cuauhtémoc continues. At closer ranges, you risk being rushed before you can reload. At longer ranges, accuracy suffers and enemies can dodge. You want to engage at the range where you can hit consistently, but where enemies cannot easily close to melee range. The students practice the throwing motion hundreds of times, building the muscle memory and coordination required for consistent accuracy. Chimali focuses on his form, ensuring that his plant foot is positioned correctly, that his hips rotate fully, that his shoulders follow through, that the release timing is precise. The repetition is mind-numbing but necessary. Cuauhtémoc constantly reminds the students that in combat, there is no time for conscious thought about technique. The body must execute automatically, must perform correctly under stress and fatigue and fear. After approximately an hour of throwing practice, the training shifts to tactical scenarios that combine atlatl and macuahuitl use. In battle, you begin with the atlatl, Cuauhtémoc explains. You engage enemies at range, attempting to wound or kill enough of them that your side has advantage when combat closes to melee. But you must know when to transition from atlatl to macuahuitl. Hold the atlatl too long and you'll be caught during reload. Transition too early and you waste the advantage of ranged weapons. The students practice scenario drills where they must make this tactical decision. Instructors playing enemy roles advance towards students who must judge the optimal moment to throw their spears, then must transition to macuahuitl before the enemies close to striking range. Chimali performs one such drill, his atlatl loaded with a training spear, lighter weight, blunted point, safe for training but still capable of causing injury if it hits unprotected areas. An instructor playing an enemy warrior advances from 60 yards, jogging steadily forward, shield raised. Chimali tracks the advancing instructor, waiting for the optimal range. At 45 yards, he throws, the training spear flying toward the target. But the instructor has been watching for the throw and dodges behind his shield, the spear missing by a few feet. Now the instructor is at 30 yards and closing rapidly. Chimali has no time to load another spear. He drops the atlatl. It hangs from his wrist on a strap, preventing it from being lost, and draws his macuahuitl from his belt, raising his shield into guard position. The instructor closes to melee range and attacks, his own practice macuahuitl striking toward Chimali's head. Chimali blocks with his shield, the impact jarring his arm, and counterstrikes toward the instructor's ribs. The instructor blocks with his own shield, and the two exchange several blows, the training weapons striking shields and occasionally finding openings to strike bodies, controlled strikes that demonstrate hits, but that don't cause serious injury. After perhaps 20 seconds of intense exchange, the instructor steps back and signals halt. Adequate, he assesses. Your atlatl throw was properly timed but poorly aimed. You must hit your target, or at least force them to evade ineffectively. Your transition to macuahuitl was quick but defensive. You must attack immediately after transition, to prevent enemies from pressing their advantage while you're changing weapons. Chimali nods acknowledgement, breathing hard from the intensity of the exchange, processing the feedback, preparing for another repetition with adjustments. The tactical scenarios continues for hours, the students rotating through various situations, multiple enemies advancing, enemies with different weapons and tactics, enemies attempting to capture rather than kill, practicing for the reality that Aztec warriors also attempt to capture their opponents. One particularly challenging scenario involves Chimali attempting to capture an instructor rather than simply fighting him. This requires a completely different approach. He must subdue the instructor without causing fatal injuries, must wrestle him to submission, or must strike him unconscious with non-lethal blows. The instructor, Yaol, the scarred weapons master, is extremely difficult to capture. He fights with the experience of dozens of real combats, knows every student technique, can anticipate their movements. Chimali attempts to close and grapple, hoping to use his youth and strength to overwhelm the older warrior, but Yaol trips him, sending Chimali sprawling to the ground, where Yaol's practice macuahuitl touches his throat, a killing blow if this were real combat. Dead, Yaol announces. You attempted capture when you should have focused on survival. In real combat, the decision to attempt capture versus fighting for your life must be based on tactical assessment. Are you winning? Do you have support? Is the enemy vulnerable? You tried to capture me when you were at disadvantage. This is how warriors die. The path to mastering fear is understanding that death is not an end, but a transformation. A warrior who dies in battle becomes one of the Huitzilopochtli's companions, dwells in the highest heaven, returns to earth as a butterfly or hummingbird. There is no shame in death in battle, no loss. Death is graduation to a better existence. But capture by enemies, being sacrificed on their altars to feed their gods, this is the warrior's nightmare. Your training prepares you to avoid this fate, to fight effectively, to escape if necessary, to die by your own hand rather than feed enemy gods if capture is inevitable. This teaching about suicide to avoid capture will prove significant when Aztec warriors face the Spanish. Many warriors will kill themselves rather than submit to capture by enemies they consider barbaric and whose gods they will not feed. Tlacaelel continues with stories of famous warriors, of legendary battles, of the glorious deaths and the shameful captures that comprise Aztec military history. The stories serve multiple purposes. They provide tactical lessons, they reinforce cultural values, they create models for students to emulate or to avoid. As darkness falls and the day's training finally ends, Chimali returns to the dormitory, eats a simple evening meal, performs his evening bloodletting ritual, and finally lies down on his sleeping mat. His body aches from the day's exertions. His arms are sore from Macahuahuitl practice. His shoulder is tender from atlatl throwing. His ribs are bruised from the strikes he took during combat scenarios. But this discomfort is familiar, expected, evidence that he has trained hard and is progressing toward his goal. Tomorrow will bring another day of similar training, and the day after, until either he proves himself in battle and earns admission to the Jaguar Warriors, or until he fails and remains a common warrior, or until he dies in combat, hopefully gloriously, ascending to Huitzilopochtli's paradise. After 2 more weeks of intensive daily training, Chimali and several other advanced students are selected for participation in a Xochiyaoyotl, a flower war, the ritualized combat between Aztec warriors and warriors from rival cities that serves both as training for young warriors and as a source of prisoners for sacrifice. The flower wars are one of the most distinctive features of Aztec militarism, prearranged battles fought for explicitly religious purposes, where the goal is not conquest or plunder, but mutual capture of prisoners and mutual testing of warriors' skills. Let us follow Chimali through the preparation and execution of his first flower war, observing how training translates into actual combat, and how Aztec warriors fight when death and capture are real possibilities. The flower war is scheduled to take place in neutral territory between Tenochtitlan and Tlaxcala, a rival city-state that has maintained independence from Aztec control and that regularly participates in flower wars to train its own warriors and to obtain prisoners for sacrifice. The selection for flower war participation is competitive. Only the most advanced students are chosen, and selection indicates that the instructors judge a student ready for actual combat. Chimali is proud to be selected, but also terrified. He has trained for years for this moment, but training and real combat are fundamentally different. The preparation begins 3 days before the scheduled combat. The selected students undergo intensive religious rituals, additional bloodletting, prayers to Huitzilopochtli and Tezcatlipoca, the god associated with warriors and sorcery, consultations with priests to receive divine guidance and blessings. Chimali participates in a ceremony where a priest paints his face and body with specific designs in black and white, patterns that invoke divine protection and that mark him as a warrior of Tenochtitlan. The paint is made from ground charcoal and chalk mixed with water, and it stiffens on his skin as it dries, creating a mask-like effect. The students also receive their combat equipment, not training weapons but real weapons intended for actual battle. Chimali receives a Macahuahuitl with genuine obsidian blades embedded in the wooden core, sharp enough to cut through flesh and bone, deadly if used with the proper technique. He also receives a Chimali shield made from tightly woven reeds and wood, covered with leather and decorated with his personal design. The shield is approximately 2 feet in diameter, large enough to provide good protection but not so large as to be unwieldy. The design painted on the shield, a stylized coyote, representing Chimali's birth name and personal totem, serves both decorative and identification purposes, allowing fellow warriors to recognize him in battle. In addition to the Macahuahuitl and shield, Chimali receives 3 atlatl darts, the quota for this engagement, Flower wars have specific rules about equipment allowed. A short knife as backup weapon, and light cotton armor, a quilted cotton vest perhaps 1 inch thick, surprisingly effective at stopping or slowing arrows and obsidian blades, while being much lighter than European armor. The night before the flower war, the selected students participate in a final ceremony at the temple of Huitzilopochtli. The ceremony is solemn and emotionally intense. The students know that some of them may not return, that death or capture are real possibilities, that this may be their last night alive. A high priest addresses them. Tomorrow you fight for the gods, for Tenochtitlan, for the honor of becoming true warriors. Some of you will capture enemies and will advance toward Jaguar or Eagle warrior status. Some of you will die gloriously and will ascend to paradise. Some of you may be captured. If this happens, die courageously, feed the enemy gods without shame, know that your sacrifice sustains the cosmos. The students spend the night in the temple, praying, meditating, preparing psychologically. Chimali finds sleep difficult. His mind races with fears and hopes, with visions of combat, with doubts about whether his training has adequately prepared him. At dawn, the war party assembles, approximately 100 warriors, including the 20 students, plus 80 veteran warriors who will participate in the flower war. The force marches out of Tenochtitlan along one of the causeways, heading toward the designated combat ground, approximately 15 miles distant. The march takes several hours, the warriors moving in organized formation, scouts ranging ahead, the entire force maintaining discipline and readiness. Chimali marches among the other students, his weapons and armor already feeling heavy despite the relatively short distance, his nervousness increasing as they approach the combat zone. When they arrive at the designated ground, an open plain with natural boundaries marked by streams and ridges, they see the Tlaxcalan force already assembled on the opposite side of the field, approximately equal in numbers, similarly armed and armored, waiting for the formal beginning of the combat. The flower war begins with ritual formalities. Representatives from both sides meet in the center of the field, exchange ceremonial greetings, confirm the rules of engagement. Combat will continue until both sides agree to halt. Captured warriors will be treated honorably and prepared for sacrifice. Bodies of the dead will be returned to their home cities and invoke the gods to witness the combat. Then the representatives withdraw. The forces form battle lines facing each other across perhaps 200 yards of open ground. And at a signal from the commanders, a conch shell blast echoing across the field, the battle begins. The Aztec force advances in organized ranks, shields raised, macahuitls ready, experienced warriors in the front ranks, with students like Chimali positioned slightly behind where they can participate, but where they have some protection from the initial shock of contact. At approximately 80 yards, the atlatl darts begin flying. Chimali in the second rank cannot yet throw effectively due to the warriors in front of him, but he watches as the front rank warriors hurl their darts toward the approaching Tlaxcalans. The darts arc through the air, some striking shields, some missing entirely, some finding targets. Chimali sees a Tlaxcalan warrior struck in the leg, stumbling and falling, immediately surrounded by comrades who pull him back from the front rank. The Tlaxcalans are also throwing, and darts flash past Chimali's position, one striking the ground near his feet, another passing so close to his head that he feels the displacement of air. The warrior next to him is less fortunate. A dart strikes his shield with tremendous force, the obsidian point punching through the reed and leather layers and penetrating several inches into the arm behind the shield. The wounded warrior cries out in pain, but maintains his position, his left arm now useless, but his right still wielding his macahuitl. In flower wars, wounded warriors who can still fight are expected to continue. Withdrawal is permitted only when one is too injured to continue, or when one's commander orders it. At 40 yards, Chimali throws his first atlatl dart. His target is a Tlaxcalan warrior advancing aggressively ahead of his line. An experienced warrior, judging by his elaborate feather decorations, probably hoping to single out an Aztec warrior to capture. Chimali's throw is technically sound. The form he has practiced thousands of times translates into smooth execution despite his fear and adrenaline. The dart flies true, striking the target's shield squarely. The Tlaxcalan warrior staggers from the impact, but remains standing, his shield now useless with the dart embedded through it. But he continues advancing, Macoitl raised. At 20 yards, the forces are too close for more atlatl throws. The warriors drop or hang their atlatls and draw Macoitls, raising shields, preparing for melee combat. Then the lines crash together with tremendous violence. The sound is stunning, shields striking shields, Macoitls impacting wood and leather, warriors shouting battle cries and screams of pain. The whole mass of 200 warriors engaged in desperate close-quarters combat. Chumali finds himself facing a Tlaxcalan warrior approximately his own age, probably also a student in his first Flower War. They exchange blows, Macoitls striking shields, each trying to create an opening for a decisive strike without exposing themselves to counterattack. The combat is nothing like training. The stakes are real. A mistake means serious injury or capture. The opponent is trying his best to subdue or kill Chumali, not pulling strikes like training instructors do. The chaos and noise and fear are overwhelming, making it difficult to focus, difficult to remember technique. Chumali blocks a strike aimed at his head, feels the impact jarring his shield arm. He counter-strikes toward his opponent's ribs, but the Tlaxcalan blocks with his own shield. They circle each other, both breathing hard, both looking for openings, both aware that capture by the other would mean sacrifice in Tlaxcala or Tenochtitlan, respectively. Around them, other combats are occurring. Some warriors are down, wounded or dead. Others are locked in grappling matches, attempting to wrestle opponents to submission. Some are fighting desperately against multiple opponents. Some are pursuing fleeing enemies, attempting capture. Chumali's opponent makes a mistake. He overextends on a strike, his shield position dropping slightly. Chumali sees the opening and strikes at the exposed neck, his Macoitl's obsidian edge cutting into flesh, blood spraying, the Tlaxcalan warrior falling to his knees. For a moment, Chumali is frozen. He has just seriously wounded another person, has seen his weapon cut living flesh, has caused the blood and pain and shock visible on his opponent's face. In training, strikes are controlled, injuries are accidents. This is deliberate, intentional, successful violence. But before Chumali can process this, another Tlaxcalan warrior appears, attacking Chumali from the side. Chumali barely raises his shield in time to block a strike that would have caught him in the ribs. He is now fighting for his life. No time for reflection. Pure reactive combat. The Flower War continues for perhaps 90 minutes of intense fighting, the two sides surging back and forth across the field. Warriors falling wounded or exhausted, prisoners being dragged to the rear by both sides, the outcome uncertain until finally both commanders signal halt. Enough prisoners have been taken, enough warriors have proven themselves, the gods have been honored with combat. The fighting stops raggedly, warriors stepping back from their opponents, both sides withdrawing to their starting positions to assess casualties and to organize the wounded and the prisoners. Chumali survives unwounded physically, but is shaken emotionally. He has fought in real combat, has wounded an enemy seriously, has nearly been captured or killed multiple times, has discovered that combat is far more terrifying and chaotic than training suggested. But he has also survived, has performed adequately, has shown courage despite fear. When the war party returns to Tenochtitlan, he will be acknowledged as having participated in Flower War combat, will be one step closer to Jaguar Warrior status, will have proven that his training has value beyond the practice field. Following the Flower War, Chumali and the other student warriors return to the Kalmekak for continued training, now as combat veterans rather than merely as students. The training continues, but with increased emphasis on the specific techniques required to capture enemies alive, the skill that distinguishes exceptional warriors and that earns admission to the elite warrior orders. Let us examine the specialized capture training that prepares warriors for the unique challenge of subduing opponents without killing them, a task far more difficult than simple combat. The master instructor for capture techniques is a legendary Jaguar warrior named Itzcoatl, a man in his 40s who has captured over 20 enemies in his career and who wears the full Jaguar skin suit that marks his elite status. His expertise in capture techniques is unmatched in Tenochtitlan, and his instruction is sought by all aspiring Jaguar and Eagle warriors. Itzcoatl begins the instruction with a fundamental principle. Killing is easy. Any fool with a Macuahuatl can kill. Capturing requires skill, requires judgment, requires courage to close with enemies when killing from distance would be safer. He demonstrates on a practice dummy, a human-shaped figure made from bundled reeds and wrapped in cloth. The capture strike must disable without killing. You target the legs, strike the thigh or knee to damage mobility without creating fatal bleeding. You target the arms, strike the shoulder or wrist to disarm without severing major blood vessels. You target the head, strike with the flat of the makuahuatl to stun without splitting the skull. The students practice these techniques, striking practice dummies, learning to control their strikes to achieve the desired effect. The control required is extraordinary. Too weak a strike fails to disable. Too strong a strike causes fatal injury. Warriors must develop the judgment to calibrate force precisely under combat stress. In actual combat, Itzcoatl continues, you must transition from fighting to capture. You fight aggressively to create advantage, to wound or exhaust your opponent. Then you shift to capture mode when your opponent is vulnerable, when they're wounded, when they're tired, when they've lost weapons or shield. He demonstrates tactical scenarios where a warrior fights normally until achieving advantage, then uses specific techniques to capture the disabled opponent. The techniques include grappling, grabbing the opponent and wrestling them to the ground, and include restraining strikes, hitting pressure points or joints to cause pain and compliance without causing fatal damage. The grappling training is particularly brutal. The students practice wrestling techniques designed for combat conditions, not sport wrestling, but violent grappling, where strikes, joint manipulation, weapons, joint face smash, and choking are all permitted. The goal is to force the opponent to the ground and to immobilize them sufficiently that they can be bound and removed from the battlefield. Chimali practices with another student, attempting to take down and control his partner while the partner resists. The grappling is exhausting and painful. Chimali is thrown to the ground multiple times, has his arm twisted behind his back in ways that threaten dislocation, is choked to the edge of unconsciousness. But he also learns how to use leverage rather than pure strength, learns which positions allow control and which expose vulnerabilities, learns that technique can overcome size and strength advantages if applied correctly. The training also covers the immediate aftermath of capture, how to bind prisoners quickly using maguey fiber cords, how to guard captured enemies in the confusion of ongoing combat, how to extract prisoners from the battlefield when fighting continues around them. A captured enemy is valuable, but also vulnerable, Itzcoatl explains. The enemy's comrades will attempt to rescue him. You must defend your capture while continuing to fight other enemies. This requires awareness, requires help from fellow warriors, requires moving the prisoner to safe areas as quickly as possible. The students practice scenarios where they must defend a captured prisoner against attackers attempting rescue. The scenarios are chaotic and challenging. Chimali successfully captures a practice opponent, but then must fight off two other students, attempting to free the prisoner while maintaining control of his captive. The tactical complexity is extreme. Chimali must maintain physical control of the prisoner. If he releases his grip to fight the rescuers, the prisoner escapes. But he also must defend himself. If he focuses entirely on controlling the prisoner, the rescuers strike him with impunity. He learns that successful prisoner-taking requires support from fellow warriors. One warrior captures, another defends against rescue attempts, a third helps move the prisoner to safety. Solo captures are possible, but are extremely risky and difficult. The training also addresses the psychological dimensions of capture. Some enemies will resist capture desperately, knowing they face sacrifice, Itzcoatl explains. These enemies are dangerous even when wounded and disarmed. They will attempt suicide, will bite and scratch like animals, will try to provoke you into killing them to avoid sacrifice. Other enemies will surrender, will accept capture in hope of mercy or escape. These enemies may feign greater injury than they actually have, may pretend compliance while waiting for opportunity to escape or to attack. You must judge which type of enemy you face and respond accordingly. Desperate resistors must be subdued violently and watched constantly. Compliant captives can be managed with less violence, but must never be trusted completely. The students practice managing resistant versus compliant prisoners, learning to recognize signs of genuine surrender versus feigned compliance, learning to maintain control while minimizing harm to prisoners who will be more valuable if delivered to the sacrificial stone in good condition. The ethical dimension of this training is complex and troubling from modern perspectives. The students are learning to capture people, so those people can be killed in religious ceremonies. They are developing expertise in violence and control that serves purposes we would consider abhorrent. But from the Aztec perspective, this is sacred work. The captured prisoners will feed the gods, will sustain the cosmos, will ensure the sun continues to rise. The warriors are not murderers, but priests of a sort, performing the essential ritual violence that keeps creation functioning. Chimali struggles with this duality. He has been raised in Aztec religious culture, has absorbed the teachings about cosmic necessity of sacrifice, genuinely believes that the gods require blood. But he has also experienced combat, has looked into the eyes of enemies he wounded, has felt the visceral horror of violence that training cannot fully convey. He resolves these doubts by focusing on duty and honor. He is a warrior of Tenochtitlan, a servant of Huitzilopochtli, a student pursuing admission to the Jaguar Warriors. His personal feelings are less important than his obligations to the gods and to his city. This resolution, subordinating personal moral qualms to religious duty and social obligation, characterizes Aztec warrior psychology and helps explain how an entire culture could practice large-scale human sacrifice while maintaining functional society and while producing individuals who were by all accounts honorable and humane in their personal relationships. After months of additional training, and after participating in 2 more flower wars where he performed creditably but did not manage to capture enemies, Chimali is finally presented with the opportunity to advance to Jaguar warrior candidacy. He is selected to participate in gladiatorial combat against a captured enemy, a ritualized form of combat that tests warriors' skills under controlled conditions. The gladiatorial combat, different from Roman gladiatorial games but sharing some features, is a religious ceremony as much as a combat test. The captured enemy will eventually be sacrificed regardless of the combat outcome, but he is given the opportunity to die fighting rather than passively on a sacrificial stone, and the Aztec warrior is given the opportunity to demonstrate skill against a desperate opponent. Let us follow Chimali through this gladiatorial combat, observing both the specific combat and the religious context that makes it meaningful in Aztec culture. The ceremony takes place at the Templo Mayor, the Great Pyramid at Tenochtitlan's center, in a space specifically designated for gladiatorial combats. A circular stone platform, approximately 15 feet in diameter, is set up, with spectator areas surrounding it where priests, nobles, veteran warriors, and other students can observe. The captured enemy, a warrior from Huexotzinco, a city-state that has been conquered by the Aztecs, is brought to the platform. He is approximately 30 years old, scarred from previous battles, and he appears resigned to his fate, but determined to die well. The enemy warrior is given a macuahuitl, but instead of obsidian blades, his weapon has feathers attached to the edges. It can strike and cause pain, but cannot cut. He is also given a shield identical to those used by Aztec warriors. This equipment disparity gives the Aztec warrior advantage, while still requiring actual combat skill to win. Chimali is given his normal combat equipment, macuahuitl with obsidian blades, proper shield, his cotton armor. He is also given final instructions by Itzcoatl. This enemy is experienced, is desperate, has nothing to lose. Do not underestimate him. Fight with full technique. Remain patient. Wait for openings. Demonstrate the skills you have learned. The combat begins with ritual prayers to the gods, and with formal acknowledgement of the enemy's courage in accepting combat rather than passive sacrifice. Then, the priest's signal begin, and Chimali and the Huexotzinco warrior face each other on the stone platform. The enemy attacks immediately, his feathered macuahuitl striking toward Chimali's head with surprising speed. Chimali blocks with his shield, the impact solid, then counterstrikes toward the enemy's ribs. The enemy blocks in turn, and the 2 warriors circle each other, exchanging blows, testing each other's defenses. The enemy is indeed skilled. His movements are economical and precise. His defense is tight. His attacks are targeted at genuine vulnerabilities. Chimali realizes he is facing an opponent superior to most of the students he has sparred with, someone whose years of actual combat experience provide advantages that training alone cannot match. But Chimali also has advantages. His weapon can cut while the enemy's cannot. His equipment is better, and he is younger and probably fresher. If he fights patiently, avoids mistakes, waits for the enemy to tire or to create openings, he should prevail. The combat continues for perhaps 10 minutes, much longer than most real combats last, but sustainable on the limited platform, where neither warrior can retreat far or can disengage completely. Both warriors are breathing hard, sweating despite the cool morning air, fatigue beginning to affect their speed and precision. Chimali sees an opening. The enemy's shield drops slightly after a hard strike, creating a momentary gap in his defenses. Chimali attacks the opening, his Makua whittle striking the enemy's shoulder, the obsidian blades cutting through the enemy's cotton armor and into the flesh beneath. The enemy staggers, blood flowing from the wound, his left arm weakened. But he continues fighting, switching to a one-handed grip on his Makua whittle, his defense now compromised by the inability to use his shield effectively. Chimali presses his advantage, but remains cautious. Even wounded, the enemy is dangerous, and overconfidence could lead to Chimali being struck with a disabling blow. He continues attacking the enemy's now exposed left side, forcing the enemy to defend with a wounded arm, gradually creating more damage, more weakness. Finally, after perhaps 20 minutes of total combat, the enemy can no longer defend effectively. Chimali strikes a decisive blow to the enemy's legs, cutting deeply into the thigh, causing the enemy to fall to his knees. The enemy attempts to rise but cannot, his leg too damaged. He raises his feathered Makua whittle in what might be a final attack, or might be a salute to a worthy opponent, and Chimali strikes him in the head with the flat of his own Makua whittle, stunning him unconscious. The priests signal halt, the combat is over. Chimali has won. The implications of this victory are enormous for Chimali's status. He has defeated an experienced enemy warrior in formal combat, has demonstrated skill and courage, has proven himself worthy of advancement. He is now eligible for initiation into the Jaguar Warrior Order, subject to final ceremonies and approval by senior warriors. But the ceremony is not complete. The defeated enemy, now unconscious and dying from his wounds, must still be offered to the gods. The priests carry him to the sacrificial stone at the top of the Templo Mayor, and there, with ritual prayers and with proper ceremony, his heart is removed and offered to Huitzilopochtli, while his blood is allowed to flow down the pyramid steps. Chimali watches the sacrifice with complex emotions. He has killed this man through combat, has earned his advancement through causing this death, and now watches the final act that gives his victory its full religious meaning. He feels triumph at his success, revulsion at the violence he caused at his witnessing, satisfaction at honoring the gods, and fear that someday he might be the one on the sacrificial stone if he is captured by enemies. After the sacrifice is complete, the initiation ceremony for Chimali's advancement begins. He is brought before a gathering of Jaguar warriors, approximately 50 men wearing their distinctive Jaguar skin suits, men who have achieved the highest military status through capturing multiple enemies, men who now will judge whether Chimali is worthy to join their ranks. The leader of the Jaguar warriors, a man named Tlacaelel, named after the legendary official, this being a common name among distinguished warriors, addresses Chimali. You have demonstrated combat skill. You have defeated an enemy in honorable combat. You have proven courage and dedication through years of training. The Jaguar warriors accept you as a candidate. Complete the final trial, and you will become one of us. The final trial is another flower war, but this time, Chimali must capture an enemy alive, rather than merely fighting creditably. This is the ultimate test, demonstrating not just combat skill, but the specific ability to subdue without killing, the skill that defines truly exceptional warriors. Chimali has trained for this, has learned the techniques, has practiced countless times. But performing in actual combat against a resisting enemy is entirely different from practice. The trial will occur in 1 month, giving Chimali time to prepare, to train specifically for capture techniques, to ready himself psychologically for the challenge. If he succeeds, he will become a Jaguar warrior, will wear the Jaguar skin suit, will receive the honors and privileges that elite warriors enjoy. If he fails, he will remain a common warrior, still honorable but not elite, still serving but not distinguished. The next month will determine his fate. As we conclude our exploration of Aztec Jaguar warrior training, let us examine what historical evidence tells us about these practices, what we can know with confidence and what remains uncertain, and what this reveals about Aztec society and about warrior cultures more broadly. The primary historical sources for Aztec warrior training come from several types of evidence. Spanish accounts, written by conquistadors and missionaries who observed Aztec culture before and during the conquest. Indigenous codices, created both before and after the Spanish arrival. Archaeological evidence from Aztec sites and comparative ethnographic evidence from other Mesoamerican cultures. The Spanish accounts are valuable, but problematic. Writers like Bernal Díaz del Castillo, who participated in the conquest, and Bernardino de Sahagún, a missionary who interviewed Aztec informants, provide detailed descriptions of Aztec military practices, warrior training, and the warrior orders. But these accounts are filtered through Spanish cultural assumptions, are sometimes deliberately biased to justify the conquest, and were written after the conquest when Aztec military power had been destroyed. The indigenous codices, pictorial manuscripts created using traditional Aztec artistic conventions, provide visual evidence of warriors, weapons, combat, and ceremonies. Codices like the Codex Mendoza and the Florentine Codex contain detailed depictions of warrior training, warrior costumes, and battle scenes. These are more culturally authentic than Spanish accounts, but were often created under Spanish supervision and may reflect post-conquest interpretations. Archaeological evidence includes weapons, armor fragments, architectural remains of military schools, and most dramatically, the physical evidence of human sacrifice found at sites like the Templo Mayor, where thousands of sacrificial victims' remains have been excavated. What can we conclude with confidence about Aztec warrior training? First, the training was indeed rigorous and began early. Boys entered the Calmecac or the Telpoc at young ages and received years of physical, military, and religious training. The training emphasized physical conditioning, weapons proficiency, and ideological indoctrination about the religious purposes of warfare. Second, the weapons we described, the macuahuitl, the atlatl, the shields and armor, are well documented in both Spanish accounts and indigenous sources. The obsidian-edged macuahuitl particularly shocked the Spanish, with multiple accounts describing how it could cut through horse necks with single strikes, demonstrating its deadly effectiveness. Third, the emphasis on capturing rather than killing enemies is consistently documented across all sources. The Aztecs did practice large-scale human sacrifice, requiring large numbers of prisoners, and this did shape military tactics and warrior training to emphasize capture techniques. Fourth, the warrior orders, Jaguar Warriors and Eagle Warriors being the most prestigious, did exist and did require demonstrated combat success for admission. Warriors who captured enemies in battle could advance in status and receive honors, while those who failed to capture remained at lower ranks. What remains uncertain or debated? The Flower Wars are particularly controversial. Spanish sources describe them as ritualized combats between cities for the purpose of obtaining sacrificial victims. Some modern scholars accept this interpretation, while others argue that Flower Wars were more complex, sometimes serving as preludes to actual conquest, sometimes as diplomatic mechanisms for managing intercity relations, sometimes as genuine mutual training exercises. The scale and frequency of human sacrifice remain debated. Spanish accounts describe enormous numbers of sacrifices, tens of thousands at major ceremonies. Some modern scholars accept these numbers as reasonably accurate, while others argue they were exaggerated for propaganda purposes. Archaeological evidence confirms that large-scale sacrifice occurred, but cannot definitively confirm or refute specific numbers claimed in historical sources. The psychological and emotional experience of Aztec warriors is difficult to determine from historical sources. We can describe their training and their actions, but understanding how individual warriors felt about the violence they inflicted and experienced requires speculation based on general human psychology and on limited textual evidence. What lessons can we derive from studying Aztec warrior training? First, warrior cultures can emerge in any society facing military threats or valuing military prowess. The Aztecs developed sophisticated military training systems, elite warrior orders, and complex combat techniques despite being a pre-industrial civilization. Military sophistication is not unique to modern or Western societies. Second, cultural values profoundly shape military practices. The Aztec religious belief that the gods required human blood to sustain the cosmos fundamentally shaped how they practiced warfare, emphasizing capture over killing, accepting high risks to take prisoners, conducting ritualized combats for explicitly religious purposes. Third, military training served socialization functions beyond combat effectiveness. Aztec warrior training indoctrinated students in cultural values, created social bonds, established hierarchies, and channeled aggression into culturally approved forms. These functions are common across warrior cultures. Fourth, the brutality of warrior training reflects the brutality of the military tasks being trained for. Aztec warriors faced death or capture in combat, were expected to kill or capture enemies, were required to witness and participate in human sacrifice. Their training prepared them for these realities through physical hardship, psychological conditioning, and ideological indoctrination. The tragic fate of the Aztec warrior system provides final perspective. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived in 1519, the Aztec military, including the elite Jaguar and Eagle warriors, fought bravely but ultimately unsuccessfully against European weapons, tactics, and most devastatingly, against European diseases that killed more Aztecs than combat ever did. The warrior training system that had made the Aztecs dominant in Mesoamerica proved inadequate against enemies from beyond their known world. The religious ideology that sustained warrior morale, the promise of paradise for those who died in battle, the cosmic necessity of capturing enemies, could not overcome the material advantages of steel weapons, horses, and firearms. By 1521, Tenochtitlan had fallen, the Aztec Empire had collapsed, and the warrior orders that had dominated Mesoamerican warfare for centuries had been destroyed. The training schools were closed or converted to Christian purposes. The warrior costumes and weapons were taken as curiosities. The sacrificial practices were suppressed with extreme prejudice. But the legacy of Aztec warrior culture survives in historical memory, in the archaeological record, in the indigenous cultural traditions that persisted despite Spanish conquest. Warriors like our fictional Chamali represent real people who trained brutally, who fought bravely, who died in causes they believed were cosmically necessary, who exemplified both the remarkable capabilities and the tragic limitations of human warrior cultures. Understanding Aztec warrior training helps us understand both the specific history of Mesoamerican civilizations and the broader patterns of how human societies prepare people for violence, how they justify that violence through religious or ideological frameworks, and how they create elite warrior identities that serve both military and social functions. The brutal training of Aztec Jaguar warriors, the daily physical conditioning, the weapons mastery, the capture techniques, the gladiatorial combats, the religious indoctrination, these represent a complete system for creating effective warriors in a specific cultural and military context. That the system ultimately failed against Spanish conquest does not diminish the sophistication of the training or the courage of the warriors who endured it.